planned for us today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. So excited. We've got a very, very special panel planned for today. Thank you for coming on. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your pronouns, and where you're calling us from today. Also just get excited. We've got some really exciting panelists joining us today. My name is Colin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm calling from Orlando, Florida. I hope everyone is getting hyped. I just want to remind everyone, I want to take this time to remind everyone that this is a safe space. It's a brave space as well. Please keep in mind that our panelists are being vulnerable and sharing their narratives. So please take this time to actively listen and observe. And please feel free to direct commentary into the chat at any time. And take this time to uplift one another. If you're just now joining, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started very soon. We just want to give everyone a chance to join us today. I hope you're excited. We've got an awesome panel planned. We've got a lot of superstars in one place together today, so it's very, very exciting. I was just backstage and I was just geeking out, so I'm very, very excited. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your pronouns, and where you're calling us from today. We've got someone from Canada, which is amazing. Thank you for joining us. This is so exciting. Georgia really feels like the center of the universe lately. So this is really awesome. Thank you, everyone. And if you're just joining us, my name is Colin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am calling from Orlando, Florida. And I just want to, before we get started, we're going to get started in just like 30 seconds. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone that this is a safe and brave space. Please actively listen and understand that our panelists are being vulnerable with us today, which we really, really value. And feel free to direct commentary into the chat the whole time. If you have any questions as well, post them into the chat. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it off to Nick. I'm so, so grateful that we have Nick Harris joining us today. Nick wears many, many hats, but I will let Nick introduce herself.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. We have a lot to talk about. We have an incredible panel, and of course, we're talking about what's at stake in Georgia for the LGBTQ plus community. My name is Nick Harris, hailing to you from the sunny Florida, but we've all got to get in the action and make sure that we can bring Georgia home. I'm the LGBTQ consumer advocate, only one to our statewide elected Commissioner Nikki Fried. So without further ado, who are we actually here to see? Our incredible panelists. And I get the pleasure of starting with Tanya Unzueto, who is the political director of Magenta, based out of Atlanta. And Tanya, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Tanya Unzueta. I'm political director for Mi Gente. We're a national organization that works to build power with the Latino community. And here in Georgia, we're working on the runoff, trying to knock on every door in the Latino community, and very excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Our next guest is Simon Adams. Forgot to add pronouns, he, him. Simon is the organizing director in Savannah, Georgia with the National Urban League. Simon, take it away.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. My name is Simon Adams, he, him, his. My organization is the National Urban League. Right now, I'm the organizing manager here on the ground in Savannah, Georgia, really focusing on reaching those hard-to-reach areas, marginalized communities, and really focusing on bringing out the Black and Brown vote in collaboration with groups like Mi Gente and Human Rights Campaign and others like we see today. So I'm very grateful to be on here. And thank you for calling and for bringing me on.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. Next, we have Varun Nikor. Pronouns he, him, is the president of API Victory Fund. Take it away.
Thank you, Nick. So excited to be with you all today. We're undergoing a program in Georgia this year that frankly we've not done before. And so in as much as it's an experiment, it is something I think that's going to be groundbreaking, which is essentially an AAPI rural outreach strategy. We tend to think of people of color living in cities and urban areas, but there's over 55,000 AAPIs that we've been able to uncover, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today, and certainly what's at stake. And appreciate you having me on today.
Thank you. I look forward to that. And last but certainly not least, we have Malik Brown, pronouns he, him, his. Malik is an LGBTQ advocate and also serves as a governor on the National Board of Governors for the Human Rights Campaign. Hey, Malik.
Hey, Nick. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Malik Brown. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am a proud Atlantan and a lifelong Georgian. As Nick said, I wear a couple of hats, but the one that's most relevant here is that I'm an executive committee member of HRC's National Board of Governors, and I'm excited to be amongst all of your ranks. And our viewers are in for a treat today. Nick is an incredible leader and is a fabulous moderator. So.
Oh, thank you. I'll give you your money after we're done. So we're going to jump right in. We have a lot of questions for you all to answer. And our first question, we're going to go back to you, Malik. With the January 5th U.S. Senate runoff election right around the corner, what do you think is the most important messaging we have to deliver to LGBTQ plus and people of color communities?
Absolutely. LGBTQ people know very well what has happened the last 4 years as it relates to our rights. And so having Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue fanning the flames of all of that anti-LGBTQ work that they've been doing is not helpful. And so for me and for the Human Rights Campaign, having Warnock and Ossoff as our next two senators from Georgia is critical. There are over 350,000 LGBTQ people here in Georgia. That is nothing to scoff at. There are reports that say the LGBTQ community actually carried the presidential race, depending on what outlets you want to listen to. But just knowing that LGBTQ people and LGBTQ rights are at stake, my livelihood as an LGBTQ person, as a Black LGBTQ person, is absolutely front and center on this ballot. And just knowing that there's still, while so many people see the LGBTQ rights movement as sort of ending or at least culminating with marriage equality, there's so much left to do. With the Equality Act, passing that, getting us basic protections that other communities have already enjoyed for decades. Even just, as much progress as we made in the Supreme Court with the Bostock case, which is right here in Metro Atlanta, we still need the Equality Act to codify that. And even passing things like the John Lewis Voting Act, we know, and I know we'll get into that a little bit later, it's harder for some of our people to even just cast their ballot. So there's a lot at stake.
There is. I couldn't help but notice the 350,000 LGBTQ people. I swear 75% are in Atlanta, but neither here nor there. Tanya, jump in and sort of play off of that same question. What do you think is the messaging we have to deliver to our communities?
I think it's about people understanding, that it's definitely talking about what happens here in the state of Georgia and impacts our families across the country. Right? We've been talking a lot, particularly to Latino voters, about issues of immigration, for example, about issues of the pandemic and healthcare and jobs. And the thing that's really clear to us is, honestly, like, it's not a matter of whether we believe that one party or the other is gonna save us, right? Like, I think like a lot of us are really thinking that we're going to have to organize, we're going to have to push, no matter who is like head of the Senate and even as with Biden as president. But what happens here in Georgia really determines what that organizing looks like, who we're going to have to push, if we're able to move things through the Senate or not. And I think like it is sort of about understanding that the election here in Georgia is going to shape the way in which we organize, the way in which we live, the policies that are coming from the federal level. And just like what we're able to achieve, even as community organizations, is going to look differently depending on who wins in the Senate.
Absolutely. Simon, what are your thoughts, especially coming from the Urban League? What's the messaging got to look like?
Absolutely. Well, one reason why we're here on the ground is because of all the influence we have coming into Georgia. We have people coming from all around the country in support of Georgia. And I think the real message here is to stay rooted in our intersectionality as Americans. We need to utilize this heat of the moment to unify our voting bloc as a whole and create the change we see needed, especially in our disenfranchised, marginalized communities. The way we do that is by uplifting our wide array of voices, diverse voices, onto pedestals we see in Washington and in our state Senate and our state House of Representatives, and allow for the hope of a more inclusive future, somewhat as we've seen in the previous decade. Than we have seen in the most recent history. And again, I think a lot of our movements is a bounce back between a force that is upon the disenfranchised communities. And when our backs normally pushed against that wall, we have one last resort, and it is to fight back. I think the difference this time is that we're all coming together to unite under one fight instead of individually being divided and conquered and fighting our individual fights. So just stay unified and keep on being persistent. I think that's the main message here.
Amen to that. Varun, jump in. What do you think the messaging needs to be?
Yeah, for our community specifically, the API community, I think the messaging really, frankly, needs to surround itself around this concept of, okay, there was record API turnout, right? I mean, literally, it was historical, and I think there was a lot of investments made by groups like ours and many others. But I don't think we can take all the credit, frankly. There was this organic angst, this organic anger, this, we gotta help, turn the momentum around in terms of Trump's momentum that he had, or the perception was that he had. But we can't rest on our laurels either, right? Because this was, frankly, historical turnout. Most of our community does not actually have the habit of voting regularly in elections, certainly not in elections like these unprecedented runoffs, which, frankly, are the vestige of a post-Civil War era, right? It was only put in place to suppress Black votes. It's currently in place to suppress, low propensity voters who are largely people of color and the disenfranchised, right? So we have to, the messaging really needs to be around, obviously there's an election. There's a little bit of confusion from what we're hearing from all of our volunteer groups that are making calls and doing text banking and doing door knocking about the fact that there is a vote despite the record number of ads that are being thrown out on the airwaves and the TV, right? So we really need to encourage our community that number one, there's an election. Number two, what's at stake? I know we're going to get into what's at stake. There is the world at stake. Humanity is at stake in this election. And so I think I'm going to just leave it there. I know we're going to dive into more, but, for a community that is 65% first generation immigrant, I'm a first generation immigrant, a proud first generation immigrant, there needs to be sort of that constant reinforcement.
Thank you, Varun. Great point. And you actually segue us into that second question that I have. The state of Georgia has experienced a historically complicated voting history that spans through today. How has voter suppression affected Georgia, and what can we do to solve this systemic issue? I especially can speak to that, being your neighbor right in Florida. We especially understand voter suppression, the role that it plays, especially in Black communities. But Simon, sort of speak to that. How is voter suppression affecting Georgia, and what do we do to solve it?
Yes, absolutely. I think first thing we need to do is hold elected officials accountable through checks and balances and representation. I think what we saw here in 2018 was a candidate who was running for governor and also the top official overseeing the election process, and this candidate supporting things like removing voters' names from registration lists if they haven't voted in the last few years or the last few elections, or have to make sure the license signature matches identical with the government documents. I think the way we overcome that is strictly by persistently attacking this suppression with an immediate opposing force of repercussions. For example, in the midst of all this chaos of Secretary of State also being the person running for governor, ACLU was throwing them with lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, and other organizations also, and it paved the way for new laws to come into place. Right now, that law that was actually signed into action during the election was making sure polling places cannot be changed 60 days before an election, blocking county election officials from rejecting absentee ballots because of mismatched signatures, and allowing more time for people who choose not to vote to be removed from the state's voter registration list. So I think the biggest way we overcome, again, when our back's against the wall, especially with these systemic issues, is through persistence in the way we counteract the voter suppression by uniting our voting bloc and defending the rights of those most affected at the time. It's also, there's a huge moment right now in the fact that the voter suppression has been so blatant, so obvious, so right in our face over the last 2 years. I think we kind of opened this Pandora's box where we are able to use this as our weapon to yield like way easier change and way easier revolution, because it's right in our face. The division between the suppressing party is creating such conflict between them that it's our perfect time to be able to unify and show that unity comes love, comes passion, comes persistence, and comes revolution. So I'm very excited about what's up ahead. We see it here in Georgia. Everybody's here. Everyone's coming together. We have New Georgia Project, Black Voters Matter. I'm talking about organizations that aren't on this page right now. So this is just huge. I really feel the energy, and I think I felt it ever since Virginia 2019 election when we flipped all 3 legislators there. Mm-hmm. That was huge. So I think we're just keep on progressing this blue ray. It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming. I will tell you, in South Florida, we still refer to Stacey as the rightful governor of Georgia. So we know what's been happening with that. Tanya, give me your impressions on this. Again, how has voter suppression affected Georgia, and what do we do to solve this issue?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Simon that, in a lot of ways, the voter suppression in Georgia that I've seen here is just very institutionalized. Like, we're not just talking about individual poll workers or sort of the like historical images that we see of people getting turned away at the polls. It is literally the governor unregistering people that have been legitimately registered, for example. It's organizations coming from outside of Georgia questioning, like right now there's an organization that's questioning 300,000 voter registrations, saying that there's fraud. The Republican Party in particular has been, talking about the way in which questioning, right, the legitimacy of voter registrations and even accusing some of our organizations of fraud, and bringing people in from the outside and stuff that like it's really really angering, like considering the work that we've been doing. And just to give one example, like we've been working with an organization called Latino Justice in Hall County, where in the general election they had 8 early voting registration early voting polling places, and they ended up closing 4 of them. And their excuse was that there weren't enough poll workers that felt safe like being there. And of course, the 4 polling places happened to be in majority Black and Brown communities. And so, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Of course, we're gonna be monitoring the polls on election day. There's folks who've been doing a great job of being at the polling places, even an early vote, to make sure that we're pushing back on the individual things that happen. But it's some of the systematic stuff that I think is just really needs to be pushed back at an organizing level, right? And for our communities to organize and push back.
Thank you, Tanya. Imagine that, being hypocritical, claiming fraud by suppressing also the vote. I don't get it, but Varun, jump in here.
You know, I don't make a habit of this. I'll have to say, but I was listening to the Rush Limbaugh show on the radio today, because I like to hear sort of what the other side is saying occasionally, right? I can only stand it for a few minutes before my blood starts to boil. But they were talking about voter suppression. They were talking about how the Dominion voting machines were, hacked, and, Trump, was the rightful winner. The irony of this runs it so deep, right? As deep as the deepest ocean. And so I didn't mention earlier, but I live in Virginia. I'm a proud Virginian. I've been here for 30 years. And, obviously every state in the union has a level of voter suppression that's codified so deeply, you don't even know it's voter suppression. You don't even know, frankly, it's racism, because everybody thinks, hey, jaywalking is normal. Like it's normal to get a ticket, for jaywalking, but, it has its racist roots, just like a lot of these, sort of stupid things on the books. And I can say that, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead, but, having been a Virginian and having lived through the awesome election of 2017 and, the great election of 2019, when we were able to flip the chambers, I think that we're not going to be able to systematically break down nationally, at least, unless we win these 2 Senate seats. We're not going to have an honest debate. To break this stuff down even further when we have the first Black and Asian vice president, in the history of America, right? We're really not going to get to do a lot of those things. So the irony of the Republicans screaming voter suppression and the Democrats living voter suppression is just, I don't know how that gets resolved. Frankly, but you would think there would be some middle ground there, right? I mean, maybe the Koch brothers need to invest in something like this to kind of break it down even further. But I think that the area of voter suppression is, frankly, the most vile thing that our democracy has. Right. And if the founding fathers had seen the level of voter suppression that exists today in this century, they would be turning in their graves.
Great point, Varun. Malik, I'm going to allow you to end on that one. That's tough to follow. And by the way, I'm still stuck when you say you were listening to Rush. I'm like, but I agree, we cannot live in silos. It's like playing a sport. You want to know what the other side is doing. So you're absolutely right, Varun.
Yeah, and Nick, you're correct. It's going to be tough to go after Varun, but I'll give it my best shot. People of color and LGBTQ people, we're some of the strongest and most powerful voting blocs in America. I forget which person said it, but the quote that, the Human Rights Campaign is more powerful than the NRA. Absolutely. Look at the Human Rights Campaign being the largest LGBTQ civil rights organization, not only mobilizing LGBTQ people, but just equality voters who aren't even LGBTQ, but still care about our rights. You look at where we're at right now as an organization where we only continue to grow, and you look at the NRA, who is, on its last leg with ethical challenges and all that they've been through. LGBTQ people and people of color change the outcome of elections, and it's shown in voter suppression. It's why people are so scared just to even give us the right to vote. And you hear stories here in Georgia about a bus of elderly Black people being turned around for simply trying to vote. These are people's grandparents. These are very clear. I think it's been said a couple of times. These aren't, your hidden traditional, oh, this isn't really voter suppression. No, people are pretty bold about it here in Georgia, actually. And unfortunately, it's in a lot of our laws. In 2018, we've talked about it, over 300,000 people were purged from the rolls, using government to do the opposite of what government actually exists to do, government should be providing more resources for people and making things easier for people, not, trying to disenfranchise 300,000 people of color from, doing something that is their civic duty and their right. Especially LGBTQ people, but especially even trans people. It is so hard for trans people to accomplish basic things in life, or to even just, receive the same treatment that cisgender people do. But especially with voting, you think about people who are transitioning and who don't have documentation that matches their gender identity and who they know that they are. That's an added layer that a lot of people don't have to deal with when they're trying to vote. Which is honestly, I talked about this just a little bit before, but why we need to pass the John Lewis Voting Act, because government should exist to make it easier for people to vote, not more difficult.
Absolutely. Well said. By the way, that was Governor Pat McCrory out of North Carolina, and let's hope that when this election is over, they're saying the same thing. I don't know how to get more powerful than the NRA, but we need to make sure they're not as powerful as they are. I'm going to jump to question 3. That's just my opinion, y'all. It's free. I get to say that kind of stuff. We're going to start with you, Tanya, and the question: we know marginalized communities have suffered the brunt of the economic impact of COVID. Specifically Black and brown people, LGBTQ people of color, and transgender people. Tell us more about the impact of COVID on multiple marginalized communities.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk specifically about the Latinx community and, what we've seen here in Georgia too, and nationally. So one of the realities has been that a lot of the folks in our community are in service providing industries that have been determined to be essential, right? And so what that means is that people are still going to work, but in a state like Georgia, it also means that they don't actually have an option, right? And like they're usually in places where the safety conditions are not great, where the rights of workers to begin, like from the beginning, weren't like being paid attention to. And so, there's outbreaks in the state of Georgia and poultry factories, right? Like the Latino community and immigrant community are some of the big drivers of the poultry industry in some of northern and middle Georgia. And that's where we've had some of the big infections. And it isn't because of who is there, it's because of the conditions that people are working in. I think I speaking of personal opinions and stuff, like I think the government of Georgia has failed at addressing the needs of communities of color, has, in an effort to remain, like has said that the businesses need to remain open. And, the thing to me is that there isn't, like, of course people need money, but there isn't a conversation of like, if businesses like need to be shut down because of our health, right, and because of people's safety, then there should be support from the government. We're in the middle right now of negotiating how much money people get in terms of the relief package, and I do think that people need to be paying attention to how Georgia senators and those who are running are playing, right, in terms of what we get in the end. And so anyway, I think that it's been difficult, and I think people are surviving the best way that they can.
Tanya, I want to say this. Thank you for making that point. I hear it all the time in Florida as well. Black and brown folks, we're no more likely to receive COVID than get COVID than anybody else, but it's about your zip code, where you work. And that's not just Georgia, by the way, that's doing folks a disservice. It's happening right here in my state. So again, that I regret being neighbors in that sense, but I'm going to take that same question and give to Varun. How do we talk more about the impact of COVID on these marginalized communities?
So if there's one thing that COVID has done in the consciousness of our society today, is it's sort of magnified the racial disparities that occur in terms of who's getting COVID, where they're getting COVID, starting from, healthcare workers tend to be more often than not people of color, right? First responders tend to be people of color, nurses, right? Filipino nurses come to mind. And and racial minorities, they face implicit bias in hospitals. They're often turned away from hospitals more often. Gay and transgender youth are more likely to be homeless, and that exposes them to poverty and disproportionate health outcomes. And it's this sort of systematic racism that is resulting in sickness and in death and unfortunate, unfathomable tragedy all around the country. But we have an opportunity by certainly having this conversation, and also by all the great work that the folks here on the video are doing, and many countless others to try to change that trajectory, right? So we have a party that still think the world is flat, that climate change doesn't exist, and that somehow we can get over COVID by not wearing masks, and that it will magically go away, right? And I hope very soon, sooner than later, that there will come a time when we'll look back at this and say that these people exacerbated literally the worst public health crisis, the single worst tragedy in the history of the United States, And that's what's at stake. And that's what's at stake. I think that's what keeps me motivated, frankly, especially, now I think of my 77-year-old mother who has breathing issues and numerous health issues. And I have not seen her for 2 months because I'm just too afraid. She doesn't have Wi-Fi. The FaceTime cellular service is very spotty where she lives. And so when I can get that, 2 to 5 minute connection that I do, I think, this is why I work so hard. This is why I work around people who motivate me and who, hopefully have an opportunity to change our democracy in 7 days.
Varun, great point. What you just said made me think about, I don't know if you all caught it this week. It was trending. The Black doctor who went to the hospital and was denied care with COVID, and the pain in the neck ended up passing away. So I was thinking, you could be working on a farm, you could be a first responder, or you could be a Black doctor and still not have pain and your complaints taken seriously. I thought it was awful. The CEO said today, well, the doctor probably intimidated the nursing staff. That's where we are when we try to talk about the role COVID plays in our communities. And with that, please jump in, Malik, and address that same issue.
Thank you. So in my day job, I am a government official. And when I tell you every single instance of inequity that we were working on in 2019 or January of 2020 has only been exacerbated by COVID. So if we were trying to, address crime rates, if we were trying to provide economic opportunities for youth, trans people, young Black boys, if we were trying to, help with food deserts and making it so you could, get access to fresh food within every half mile, I promise you, every single project that we were working on has only been exacerbated by this pandemic. And that's unfortunate that while tens of millions of people are suffering, there are 2 senators on this ballot who have gotten richer during this pandemic. It's shameful. As a government employee, I go through a lot of ethics trainings. I imagine at their level, they go through a lot more than me. So it's pretty shameful that, even today, seeing the news of, as folks have tried to get $2,000 into the hands of most Americans, it's being blocked. And you look at the leadership and it tells you, who's holding it up. But yeah, this pandemic has not been kind to most Americans, and particularly LGBTQ people and other people of color. Over 5 million LGBTQ people in America work in industries that have been affected by COVID-19. So that puts 5 million of us at risk. And LGBTQ people already are disproportionately affected when it comes to healthcare and employment. And so just thinking of, again, like I said, what we were trying to combat before the pandemic has only made it worse. And HRC and PSB actually have released a report detailing that, and we can get you more information.
Thank you, Malik. I just have to point that out one more time. You have someone running who made money off of stock trades, telling people it's being overplayed. A pandemic is being overblown while they're making money off of stock trades.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just sounds like somebody else might have needed a pardon.
They have gotten richer at a time where their party cannot get us $2,000.
Right. Because of course, during the pandemic, you couldn't possibly need $2,000. Of course not. Simon, please jump in here.
Absolutely. Wow. First of all, I love, Tanya, how you mentioned the working conditions. I think that is a very integral part of this conversation. But really, what I really want to lean into here is the fact that we need more accessibility of resources and information to marginalized communities, period. This isn't a COVID issue. This is a scenario that has been plaguing those marginalized communities since the 1920s. And I do not believe we will see the main effects of COVID on these marginalized communities until, unfortunately, over the next few years, where we see the effect of what a zip code, of what redlining has to do with these voting blocks and how those are affected, but simultaneously with the resources allocated to. So if you have, for instance, Varun's mother or a mother, I believe, without having accessibility to phone, imagine an entire marginalized community that didn't have accessibility to the internet and has been working so hard to be able to get a car and drive their kids to school. Now they have to stay home and buy laptops and buy chargers to those laptops and buy Wi-Fi connection and buy cable because you don't even know what type of information you're going to get from the internet nowadays. So then you multiply that with the lack of information or just accessible to those communities. They don't have those more inclusive, opinionated networks. They will have 3 networks to choose from and just choose your favorite of what you've heard before. And that's just because of generational knowledge of where to outsource your information from. And I think just in not knowing where to outsource our information from, multiplied by the lack of resources granted to these communities, it's a crisis that's on our hands. And even Malik mentioning that people are profiting and the fact that there's no connection between politician and constituent anymore from a certain party's perspective. That is, to me, insane because there's no bridge of needing to conform to a constituent anymore, and the opinion of the masses do not truly matter at that point. So what I truly want to focus on in creating this better world, this better future after 2020, after COVID, is of course mandating masks, but more importantly, making sure that we are inclusive in writing our future plans to these Black and brown communities. We do not want to create a plan that is only focused on helping people with already accessibility to these resources. We need to make sure these resources are started from scratch to be accessible to these marginalized communities.
Great point, Simon. We also want to take a moment to open it up for general questions that you all might have. So feel free to jump in if you have any questions for our panelists. We're happy to take them and weigh in here. So here's my question while we're waiting to get some of these questions from folks watching, and thank you for joining us again. We know what's at stake. Everything we've talked about, we know that. How can people get involved with your organizations? And like I said, I'm going to have us do that, but we may be jumping back to take some questions as well for our panelists. So if you have some questions, let me know. Hang on. Let me go over here and check. Right now, let me try and go to you. Malik, what are some ways folks can get involved right now?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to hrc.org. You can find us on Facebook at either Human Rights Campaign or HRC Atlanta. There have been daily activities for months that folks can plug into. So phone banking, text banking. We've done some virtual drag shows. There have been some holiday sweaters and GOTV, some wigs and GOTV. HRC has really, really been focused on Georgia. We just did a fundraiser. And our president, Alfonso David, was just on the ground here. And you should be seeing on your computer 2 QR codes where you can go take your phone out, scan them, and it'll connect you. So these are upcoming volunteer opportunities. And I think the next slide is going to be an opportunity to donate. But if you want to participate in any of our GOTV efforts, just go ahead and scan these on your smartphone.
And I'm just checking to see if we have any additional questions. Thank you for all of those. And I'm sitting here scanning myself. So I hope you actually have. And for those that I don't want to be ageist. I'm really not. But I had to explain this to my mom. If you open up your camera, you can take a picture of this and it will lead you to it. So let's not assume everybody knows that. But Tanya, how can people get involved right now?
Yeah, so we have phone banks and text banks happening all throughout, particularly right after New Year's. It's a great way to start your new year, participating in Georgia. You can check out our campaign at Georgia Con Ganas, CONGANAS. And for those who speak Spanish, ganas is like to have the want, the desire. So it's like Georgia with desire to want to win. And also I invite people who are out there who might identify with the Latino community to be Mi Gente members. This is a fight that we're going to have not just in Georgia and not just right now, but throughout the year. And this is I encourage people to organize and become involved with organizations that you identify with.
Absolutely. We do have a question, gang. Mackenzie Rowe, are your organizations educating people on what's at stake in Georgia? And that is what we're trying to do here now. And these folks definitely are doing that, especially low turnout voters. If so, in what ways? And Tanya, since you were just speaking, I'll let you take that first.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is some of the stuff that folks have mentioned of knocking on doors and talking to voters. And particularly, I think going outside of the Atlanta metro area is particularly important. There's folks who we're finding in rural areas in the South whose doors have never been knocked on, who political campaigns have never reached out to. And so I think, we're doing that by trying to reach every possible person for this important election.
Varun, how are you all trying to reach low turnout voters?
Yeah, very much the same of what Tanya said. I mean, we started coordinating with the local Georgia groups several months before the November election, rather, and we knew that, for example, and I want to give a shout out to AAAF Georgia, Asian American Action Front of Georgia. They're doing amazing, groundbreaking work. And we're, largely responsible for that 91% increase in Georgia turnout, and the other great groups there as well, New Georgia Project, Fair Fight, many, many others. And so we decided, okay, if they've got the Atlanta turf covered, let's us focus on someplace where they weren't necessarily going to concentrate. We started looking at, well, let's see how many API voters live in rural areas outside of Atlanta. Initially, the voter file said 20,000, and we were like, this has got to be wrong. We did some really deep dive and data analysis, and there was, and this, I mean, if there's anybody who loves the voter file, please raise your hand. I don't know anybody who loves the voter file. It just inherently is so bad. Please, let's invest billions of dollars in this. And so anyway, we found an additional 25,000. So there's 55,000 and likely more AAPI voters that live in rural Georgia. We don't live in, urban areas. We don't live, next door to each other necessarily. We're just like everybody else. We're all over the place. And so we are trying to knock on those doors. And to the extent that we can, we're looking for volunteers still. If you go on to AAPIVictoryFund.com you'll see our Georgia link plastered prominently on the front page. But we're looking for volunteers if you want to do text banking or phone banking, or actually drive to Georgia. We'll I think we have some money for housing if you want to come down to Georgia. There's pockets of APIs that live in Augusta and Macon and Savannah, as well as sort of this rural belt in central Georgia, just south of Atlanta, that we didn't know about. So they're all over the place. We're all over the place. Get in touch. We're happy to plug you in.
Varun, if I can ask you to do this, we're talking to folks who we just spoke about COVID. What are folks doing if they're worried about COVID and knocking on doors? Can you speak to that? What precautions are being taken? And also speak to what's the experience like for somebody who goes, I've never done that.
Yeah. So number one, we just recognize the concern that everybody has, and 2020 has sort of I think been a lesson in empathy for everyone, right? But just if people, feel safe to do this, fantastic. We're not pushing, in any way, shape, or form. That being said, there are safe ways to canvass. And I'm sure all the groups that have got these similar types of operations have canvassing guidelines in COVID. We make sure we give everybody sort of a brief training on how to do this safely, and that sort of thing. That's how we start. The thing is that I think there's a lot of, not that younger people are immune, but I think younger people are feeling like perhaps they are a little bit more inclined to do something like this. Certainly, if you have any, health conditions or you just don't feel safe, we don't push. But there are safe ways to do it, we believe, and so I'd encourage anybody who was interested to get involved.
Thank you, Varun. Simon, tell me this, how can folks get involved with your organization? And also, I want you to speak to what would that experience be like if they were doing it?
Absolutely. First thing I would like to do is touch on Mackenzie's question about especially contacting these low turnout voters. If so, in what ways? I think that's the big organizer question here. I think that's all organizers have been scratching their head at, biting at the bits, blood, sweat, and tears, all the above, trying to figure out, especially in this social distanced atmosphere. One thing that I want to supply you with is the ability to mobilize your household, mobilize your neighborhood. That's where we start. We start by mobilizing the people we know, especially if you're tuned into this conversation, if you're right now on this live and you are just listening to all this, you love it, you love the energy, you're energized by any of this, bring that energy somewhere else. It's literally a whole conglomeration that needs to happen. And one thing that we're doing here at the National Urban League is we're really trying to meet people where they're at. We're doing barbershop talks. So we're just sitting down, just like how we're having conversations right here. And we're going into fresh fade.
I like a fresh fade now, Simon. I might be there.
Exactly. So just really focusing on tapping into communities where they're most influenced, trying to, you always try to have a creative outlook, especially in an ever-changing atmosphere that we were presented with COVID. So really trying to tap in that way, going into, we're also hair salon and beauty talks too. I just am not hosting any of those, but just National Urban League is also doing those in Georgia. So definitely inclusive there. And more than anything, I think the way to get active, if you're in Georgia, get up and vote. Go tell your best friend, get out and vote. Go tell your neighbor, get out to vote. If you're not in Georgia, go call some people that you know to tell them to get people out to vote. It's word of mouth. This is how we're going to get things done. If you don't know anybody in Georgia at all, and you're like, okay, well, I can't do any of that you just asked me to do. Phone banks everywhere. Everyone has them. There's a million people on the ground here from all different countries, but all different states in the United States, especially. I know I've been doing human rights campaign, dual phone banks, and everyone was from outside of Georgia. And that was huge. Like it's a huge conglomeration. Exactly. And so just really leaning in, and I know you might only have an extra hour, you might only have an extra 2 hours in a day. Most people will say they only have it in a week, but I'm pretty sure we could find time, an extra hour per day to make phone calls. I promise you we can win this thing in a heartbeat. We're already hitting corners that we've never hit before. I didn't even know what runoff was happening, and sometimes I get an answer. We need more of those answers so that we can mobilize them immediately to the polls. So yeah, absolutely lean in.
Simon, one more question. How do they get in contact with your organization?
I would love to just drop my direct email in here. So I would say it out loud, and then I'm also going to put it in the private chats. SADAMSCONS@NUL.org. I will get y'all put in with our day-to-day phone banks. Also, we can get you situated with the barbershop talks. It will be on video just like this. Pretty interesting conversation happened during the preface of the barber. Like when I walked in there, they were definitely talking about never wanting to vote and stuff like that, and the conversation just got all over the place. So a little trailer to be able to zoom in and try to figure out how we're actually on the ground trying to make those minds more malleable. And then on top of that, we are having the opportunity for rides to the polls. So we have a volunteer group here on the ground in Savannah and Atlanta to give rides to the polls. And then simultaneously, if somebody does not have a car and they have an absentee ballot already filled out, we will pick up that absentee ballot and drop it into the closest mailbox as well. So shoot me an email, send me names, send me phone numbers, send me your name and phone number, and I will get you infiltrated as well. I love it.
Absolutely. Did we catch everybody? Yeah, I think that's it. Please go check out this barbershop thing. I know they're talking about this and the twisted tea, but we're not going to go there right now. So here, anything else you all want to add? Look, Malik is like, see, you acting up. What else would you all like to add right now? If, I'm putting it out there. We've given all the reasons why folks need to get activated. I'm just going to add this. Don't sleep on the opportunity to help. Don't be the person the day after the election talking about I woulda, coulda, shoulda. You don't have to go and be in person. But if you're sitting home, and most of us who let me be clear, not everybody can. But if you're home and working from home or in the pandemic, there's no reason you can't pick up your phone. Literally, they'll take an hour of your time, an hour, to be able to say that you did your part to make sure that we can get the Senate. Like literally, people's lives are depending on this. The stat today said 1 in every 1,000 Americans have died of COVID. That's scary. And now we're talking about after the holidays, folks are traveling. So we're not going to let voter suppression get in the way. Make them turn you away, but don't stay home. We got to get out and do what we need to do. So with that, anything else you all want to add? Y'all have been fabulous.
Nick, I'll just add, especially to build on what you talked about, how this is just a deadly year, something that we haven't been able to touch on just yet. Like, this is the deadliest year on record for trans people, under an administration that has just been, fanning the homophobic flames, or the homophobic and transphobic flames. So, while I am cisgender, I feel like it is my responsibility, and it's all of our responsibilities as leaders, to make sure that we talk about it and make sure that we elect people who are going to, create change like the Equality Act, change, like giving trans people more opportunities, especially around, home ownership, job opportunities, basic healthcare. So I just could not, leave without saying that this has been a hard year for us all, but especially for the trans community, especially for Black and other trans people of color. And the only thing that I noticed, or the only other thing that I'll mention that I found very interesting is there's an organization here called Battleground Georgia. The link is battlegroundga.com. They are seeking to get out 100,000 Black voters who did not vote on November 3rd in Georgia. So 100,000 Black voters could be the turn of this election, honestly. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Battleground Georgia.
I really appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. The assault on transgender rights in general, how are we turning people away from the military? If you're prepared to give your life in service to our country, why would we be telling people we don't want that? I mean, but this is the same president that was playing golf while a bomb went off in Nashville. Please stop it. Please stop it. If you're wondering why we need the Senate, this is reason 9,999,000. Like, we have to win the Senate. Anything else anybody want to add?
I would like to add that I think, in these closing 7 days before the election, we need to remind the voters that, frankly, if you recall, days after the November election, the Supreme Court held a hearing to determine the constitutionality of pre-existing conditions in the Affordable Care Act, right? So that case is likely not going to get announced. The outcome of that case is not going to get announced until sometime early next year. If we don't win the Senate, we will not have the votes to beat back a negative outcome in the Supreme Court. Tens of millions of people could lose the most fundamental basic right of healthcare, right? Every single person on earth has a pre-existing condition, whether they know it or not. COVID is a pre-existing condition, right? And so this is truly what's at stake. And yes, there's racial justice, environmental justice, everything is all there. But without healthcare, none of us will be able to prosper and go forth once COVID is over with any kind of surety that this government is going to take care of us. So that's something I think we really need to hammer home these last couple of days.
You are absolutely right. If we did not learn from the Obama administration, it matters about the court. It matters about who's in control of Congress. And unless you would like the Biden-Harris administration to be based off of executive orders, you need to show up and show out in Georgia. We cannot have a repeat of the foolishness we've just seen. With that, do you all mind taking a picture?
Love to.
Okay. I don't know how this works. So as Colin, get ourselves ready. Thank you, Tanya. I'm like, I needed to go to the little shop first. Okay. All right. We'll take our picture. Yay. And I guess I'm doing it. I'm waiting on somebody else to pull out a camera. It will be me. And thank you all to our audience. Okay, I got it. Perfect. They got it. We want to thank our audience for joining us, and we know you're going to do your part to make sure we can bring Georgia home, not just for the Biden-Harris administration, but for the people in our country. That's who it matters most for. You aren't doing this for the administration. You're doing it for yourself and for your loved ones. We need a change. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And with that, I don't see any more questions. So we're going to bid you a wonderful evening. Stay safe and make sure you wear your mask, being thoughtful of yourself and others.